Welcome to GardenDC, the podcast about everything gardening in the Washington, D.C. and Mid-Atlantic region. I'm your host, Kathy Jentz. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine, and we're aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. Welcome to episode 152 of the GardenDC podcast. In this episode, we speak with Bonnetta Adeeb of the Ujamaa Cooperative Farming Alliance, a program under the nonprofit STEAM ONWARD, all about heritage seeds. The plant profile is on Yarrow, and we share what's going on in the garden, as well as some upcoming local gardening events in the What's New segment. We close out with Ellen Wells of Food and Flower Inc., who shares the last word on growing cucamelons. Joining us on today's episode is Bonnetta Adeeb. She is the founder of STEAM ONWARD, and part of STEAM ONWARD are two projects: Ujamaa Cooperative Farming Alliance, an organization dedicated to aiding minority groups, and Ujamaa Seeds, a fundraising effort to provide diversity in farming and bridge the gap between prospective growers and seed companies. Welcome, Bonnetta.
Thank you so much for having me, Kathy.
It's wonderful to have you on, and we're going to talk all about seed stories and backgrounds and the cultures that have brought us some of the seeds that we are growing in our own gardens and some of the seeds that we can start to grow and bring back some of those heritage varieties that maybe have been lost to time but are getting revived. So we'll go into all of that in a minute. But first, on the GardenDC podcast, we like to ask our guests, were they born with chlorophyll in their vein and or a green thumb?
I'll have to say that it must be true that I was born with chlorophyll in my veins. Certainly, my oldest memories are from the garden and from distributing food as a part of the work of my grandparents. My grandfather was a minister in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and we distributed fresh fruits and vegetables to our neighbors. And so in my onesies, I can remember going out with him with boxes of fresh food, delivering those to communities in need. And so today, this very day, I started off a conversation with a new group of Black farmers in the Mid-Atlantic that's looking at reclaiming our agricultural heritage, but reclaiming control of the food supply. Communities are in need, but we can't count on anybody to really deliver that in a consistent manner. We've got to take back the skills and knowledge it took to be sustainable. And so we're busy doing that work. And I must tell you, a blessing comes along with that.
Mm. And it's so important to have control of what you're eating, what you're growing, and never to lose that, I think, because that's where the power is, right, Bonnetta?
It is the ultimate power, and it's also the ultimate nod of respect to our ancestors who provided for us, all the multi generational folks that were seed savers and produced food, quality food for their families, and of course, into the beautiful planet, Mother Earth, that is so rich and has done so much for us. And we need to be more grateful. And that's what I like to say is we need to show more humility, and we need to do more to show respect for this beautiful gift that we've been given.
I think we take so much for granted, and that includes, a lot of what comes to our table is just magically there, right?
Unfortunately, it's not magically there.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, the people who do that work, who provide that wonderful food that we love, I mean, let's face it, some of our happiest times in life are over a meal. and the best fun, the most joy. But the people who brought that food to our table, and the generations of seed savers that provided those varieties to us, are forgotten and not acknowledged. And that's a problem. It's a problem when you don't give thanks. When I was a child, just about every child, when they sat down at the dinner table, gave thanks. But nowadays, it's like there's a feeling that somehow the food just magically appears,
Mhm, mhm,
and we don't have any responsibility or any duty to acknowledge where that food comes from. And so we're reclaiming it, we're celebrating it, and our goal is to bring that knowledge forward to future generations. And that is what's so exciting about the work of Ujamaa.
mhm. I think it's all about connections, like making the connection between what's growing and that original seed. I think some people, have never seen a seed other than those edible seeds, like say a pumpkin seed. They wouldn't know what a okra seed or a collard seed looked like. And then there's that connection between the farmer and how it gets to you, and making those connections, which, at farmers markets and those type of things, you might be able to talk directly to a farmer, but a lot of people have never made that type of connection to know their farmer.
Yeah, and not only has that connection been lost between the consumer
Mhm.
and the people who bring you the food, but even between farmers. Most farmers have forgotten the art of seed saving. And a few years ago, I'm going back maybe 80 or 90 years. As we're interviewing farmers, we're finding out that many of them were buying their seeds from the local store and doing very little seed trading. So there are certain communities you can go into where people have kept up the art of seed swaps, and which is so important and such an
Mhm.
important cultural activity to do in order to preserve heirloom varieties. But it's also important for biodiversity and biogenetics. I mean, the seeds that we have are, we know that human beings cannot intermingle but so much and have a good results. So it's
Mhm.
the same thing with plants. You have to be careful how they cross, how they intersect. And then in order to preserve certain varieties, it requires isolation. So when you think about some of the patterns of human behavior, some of them we like, some of them we don't like, it was ordered to maintain, a breed or a variety or a staple. And those same things we learned, we see in human behavior. Almost everything we do is a reflection of what we see in the natural world. So it's very exciting. So we want farmers to also regain the skills of seed saving, because seeds are a commodity and have been commodified by a few companies in the world. They're attempting to control our entire food supply. And people don't realize that that's like having the cartel, the oil cartel, having control of all the oil. So when they decide to raise prices or lower prices, or create or stop producing altogether, we're victimized by that. So what we need to do is bring back some basic survival skills all the way down to the grandma and grandpa and children level, and make sure that every person at least has some concept of how they can help provide for themselves. And even in urban settings, or no matter where you are, there's probably something you can
Mhm.
grow that you could consume. So, we consider ourselves a part of a greater movement to reclaim that agricultural heritage, because if we eat, each day we are participating in agricultural activities. So nobody's as far away from agriculture as they think they are.
Very much so. Yeah, and I always say that, are you breathing air? The plants provided that air. That oxygen came from the trees. Like, are you eating and breathing? So we do hold an annual a seed swap day and seed exchange with Washington Gardener magazine, and we're always so pleased when people bring some of their family seeds and the stories that go along with them. And so we'll go into some of those stories. And Bonita, I wanted to dial it a little bit back to where you talked about your childhood in North Carolina. And from there, Where did you go professionally? Because we want to talk a little bit about you and your background, and then how you got to the Washington,
Well,
D.C.
I must
region.
tell you that the ancestors and the spirits were clearly calling me back home. I grew up. I was born in Detroit, Michigan. My mother decided that we needed to go back to North Carolina where we had a big garden, but we come from a family who's been farming in the United States since 1710, as far as back as we can go.
Hmm.
And we know that the pride that was had in these farmers and their ability to take care of their families was, one of the bragging rights, of our family. Like one of my great granduncles was the first black extension officer in Winsboro, which is in Fairfield County, South Carolina. They bragged about that. He was the bomb diggity, because he was respected at the level that he was able to advise all the farmers in that county. And along with that, success of farming came the ability to produce enough food to have surplus. And I want to talk about surplus because surplus is the thing that created civilization. So the fact that farmers were successful enough to produce more than just what they needed for their families, but for other folks in their community, allow people to move away from farming activities and make some shoes or do some ironwork or become a baker or do other tasks. So the success of farmers is the
Hmm.
success of civilization. And I'll be doggone it, I'm going to tell everybody that. If you're doing a job that is not farming related, you have to thank your ancestral farmers who were able to build a society that was successful enough to create surplus. Surplus is the basis for
Hmm.
civilization. I know, let me get down off my pulpit and go back and talk about my family a little bit. But it was
Nah, but I think that is such an important point. You're so right, Benita, that bounty of the earth that was able to be stored and shared and commodified, that created
That is
literally
the
economies.
definition of a civilization, and it requires some people to be highly skilled. So, in my family, like I said, it was bragging rights. I have you live in Washington, D.C. I don't know if you've ever heard of a school called Kelly Miller Middle School. Have you heard of that school? Yes, well,
Mhm,
that Kelly Miller is my
mhm.
great granduncle. So that's a story that I'd like to
Ah,
talk a little bit about as I learn more about it. Kelly Miller was a small boy playing in the dirt along a road, and I believe there were Quakers who were setting up schools after the Civil War, and they came by, saw this little boy scratching in earth, and realized he was adding numbers. Those were numbers that he was scratching. So Kelly Miller, who was my grandfather's uncle, was brought to school at Howard University when it was a school set up originally for by General Howard. He was a Indian war hero, and he set this school up for Native Americans. But because of the flight after the Civil War, there was movement, there was a migration north, and thousands of African American people were leaving the South, coming to Washington, D.C. So my great grand uncle was involved in the work related to that. So what Kelly Miller did is after he finished what was then a high school at Howard a normal school, it became a college, and he graduated from Howard University. And then he once he finished, he wanted a more education, so he was the first black man admitted to Johns Hopkins University. And when he came back uh, from his educational uh, journeys, he started the university. He helped to convert Howard University from a college to a university, using that model. He was the dean of the School of Arts and Sciences, uh, and he worked so hard. His background in mathematics turned out to be astronomy, and he loved the stars as I do. I had so many dreams of observing the stars, but because of this great migration that came to Washington D.C., Kelly Miller moved his attention to studying how the needs of these migrants, as they came, they were sleeping in parks. They came up with nothing but the clothes on their back or small suitcase. Where were they going to live? And so he, along with other thinkers of their time, W. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, began to study the needs of these communities and helped to develop what we call sociology, modern day sociology, which is the study of humans. So Kelly Miller, after he did this work, he did two things that are related to this conversation. One, he started a very large garden at Howard University, which was super important, and worked to be an example of meeting the needs of the community there at Howard. But secondly, he went back home to Winsboro and he bought the plantation that his mother was enslaved on. And this is one of the most important stories in my family is how, I mean, what sweet revenge when you really think about it. So my great great grandmother, Rebecca, was proud of her skills. She worked on the Southern Railroad to build that. She was proud about that. But my uncle Kelly Miller was not thrilled with, having his mother as an enslaved person. So he was able to buy that plantation and do work in Winsboro. So uh, I'm really, really now focused on how the work that we do can serve our community in a firsthand way. How can I put something nutritious in the hands of individuals? And I realize that I don't own 10,000 acres of land, but what I do have access to is heirloom variety seeds. And by putting these seeds in the hands of individuals, they can begin to take sovereignty over their own food supply. And that is essential work. And it's the work that when I do this work, I see Kelly Miller. I'm looking at a photo of him now, and I'm standing on the shoulders of these great ancestors of mine who came here with skills. They were brought here because of their agricultural skills, but we're able to multiply those, teach others, and work and support us in living a happy, healthy life, which we can't do without a good meal. We have to have it. So
Mhm.
that's kind of one of the stories that connects me. My grandfather, the one I spoke about earlier, and his work to deliver food to the community, and George Washington Carver and his Jessup, a wagon that traveled throughout the South, helping farmers gain sovereignty, grow their own food, and become independent, support their families. So it's such an important work, and I thank my ancestors providing me with a roadmap to the work that I need to do currently.
Mm. Well, that is a wonderful story about your family background. And I had no idea that Howard had any type of space for growing on the campus at any time. I always think of it as the medical school and some of the arts that are prominent there, but that's great to hear about some of that agricultural background.
Thank you. I'm working with Dr. Ida Jones, who was the archivist previously at the Moreland Spingard Library, which Kelly helped to find. And she told me about this garden. So we are, along with some folks working with Kelly Miller Middle School Farm. They actually have a farm at Kelly Miller Middle School. And we will be
Hmm.
working with them to rediscover the location of the gardens and to reinstitute that, if possible, on the Howard campus. It's a dream. I'm just at the first steps, but you probably know me. I'm pretty pig-headed. If I put my mind to something, as long as I have breath, I'll be trying to get it
Well,
done.
I'm looking forward to the ribbon cutting opening of that at Howard and being able to attend that. And for those listeners who might be outside the Washington, D.C. area, I'm sure you're familiar with Howard University. And the Kelly Miller School is in the Deanwood neighborhood of Washington, D.C., if you ever want to come by in the city and check that out. So let's talk a little bit about some of those heritage and heirloom seeds that Ujamaa Seeds is carrying, and maybe we should actually start with how did that name come about, and what is Ujamaa Seeds?
So I was working in communities with health departments and communities on hunger issues. I had a group of high school kids, and when they went to college, some of them stayed with me, and we were working on hunger initiatives. And we had kind of two pieces of it. One was looking because we have access to beautiful Chesapeake Bay, how could we increase the food availability coming out of the waterways, and then also looking at heirloom, fresh vegetables coming from the region. And in this work, I met a woman by the name of Fatima Hassan, who is an urban planner for Prince George's County, who was focusing on land and heirs property and supporting growers in Southern Maryland. So we sat there at this hunger meeting going like, we're going to do something one day together. And it turned out that we had the opportunity to begin to talk about how we could reintegrate a love for the natural world, a world protecting the environment back into with public school kids. And so I'm on the advisory of Prince George's County programs, ag, environmental, ed, natural resources programs. So we began to put our heads together and come up with the idea that we could develop, encourage schools to do more and use the school facility as a growing space. There were other people like Dr. Paul Lovelace from Akaki Foundation and other people who joined us in this idea. And we had to fund it. That's always the hardest part for nonprofits. So we came up with the idea that we would start selling seeds, native fruit, nuts, and berries, and starts as an entrepreneurial activity for the youth. And we set it up. The kids worked the whole year to develop their online website when COVID came and shut down all the work that these young folks had been doing. And so, about a week later, I got news from Paul Lovelace about the beginning of the Cooperative Gardens Commission. We joined the Cooperative Gardens Commission and developed a system for distributing free seeds donated by the organic seed industry to people in need across the country. So about 2,000 volunteers stepped up to create kind of a victory garden idea, but this time the government didn't step up. We didn't have any help from the government.
Hmm.
And so we developed a seed hub in Philadelphia that distributed seeds to 300 organizations, individuals that would distribute those to communities in need. So STEAM Onward became the seed hub for the DMV. But because we had already developed an online presence, we were able to send seeds to anyone in the country or anyone that the U.S. Postal Office could reach from our website. So that free seed website, I think we started out with 6 varieties of seeds. We were going to charge like $2 for each one, and that turned into a free seed hub. And people ordered seeds. I think over the course of time, between my organization and the others, we're still going. We are distributing sweet potatoes right now, but we were able to support about 100,000 gardens. Unfortunately, most of the communities that we were serving were not getting the things that they felt were culturally meaningful. They were asking for things like, do you have any of that kalaloo? Or do you have Scotch bonnet? Or do you have molakaya? Or do you have bitter melon or bitter leaf? They were asking for things that were not donated to us. And so my dear friend and collaborator, uh, um, uh, Nate Kleinman came up with the idea that we need to get started seed farming ourselves. So we had thought about what we should start with. We started out with sorghum because it's a very culturally meaningful variety. We started out growing Della, and we had the kids who were considered essential workers during COVID, so they're able to get out to the farm. We planted a crop of Della sorghum, which is a sweet sorghum that has multiple uses, and it was very exciting. The kids, it didn't require a lot of maintenance. So, I think one time we went to weed it, and then we produced our first harvest in 2020, I believe. And from that, we got the bug that we could produce our own seed. But from that particular crop came much value added products. So we produced a syrup similar to maple syrup that was commonly eaten all over the East Coast many years ago. We produced a molasses. It makes the most delicious gingerbread. But we also, from the leaf, realized that we could make native dyes and fibers from the leaf, from the bagasse. It could be used to create biochar. And we also realized that the seed could be used as flour, or even sorghum milk could be produced from it. Uh, a high protein rich breakfast cereal. And we began to realize all the things that were could be developed from this one crop. And so that kind of launched us to want to do more. And as we began to search the government, that a collection, GRIN, which is Agricultural Research Service seeds, we found multiple varieties of sorghum that were suited, that had naturalized itself, even though it's an African crop that originated in the Horn, it has naturalized itself all over the world. And so we started out with that one crop. Then we began to hold these events where we talked to people. This was all during COVID, so it was online. We asked people to bring the eldest member of their family and to talk to us about what was grown in their garden, what was in your granny's garden. If you slipped and you hurt your knee, did grandma put a treatment on it? If you got a cold, or if you were sick, what was the remedy that grandmother was using, or grandfather, that came from the garden? And so from these, I guess we did that almost a year. We developed a suggested list of what plants were culturally meaningful from the Caribbean, from Africa, from the South, from the Asian communities, and from our local Native American communities. We started that work. So once we were able to identify what was meaningful, then it was our duty to farm that and to produce seed crop, to make that available. Those were not available for most of the seed companies, that the organic seed companies, because they're southern crops and they're African crops, and they weren't grown in the Northeast, where most of those companies are located. So we began to adapt those crops, and we continue to do that work. Um, and I think you've probably heard of the Heirloom Collard Project, which was another one where 120 varieties of collard were languishing in freezers somewhere. And our dear co-founder of Ujamaa, Mama Ira Wallace from Southern Exposure, helped us to bring heirloom collards out of the vault and into the gardens and into some pots, so we could celebrate that delicious food that was basically developed by enslaved populations throughout the southern states. So
Mm.
it's been a journey of love, and I'm sitting here. I think I have 12 or 15 varieties of sorghum. There's multiple use in front of me right now. Also, we did work on trying to help people understand that all the southern peas are derived from Africa. And so we've done a lot of work around educating people about honoring the original seed keepers. In this case, all the southern peas are from Africa. They came in slave ships and in other ways to the United States. And our joy with Ujamaa is to grow out these varieties of seeds and make them available to the public. So we're
Mhm.
working. I have right here something called the Southern Pea, the Peking Black, which is a delicious seed that we are growing in partnership with Southern Exposure Seed Exchange. But we work with Utopian Seeds. We have over 200 varieties of okra, and we're working on perennial tropical plants. I don't know if everybody knows that sweet potato, or a tropical perennial that has been developed to grow. We know how to hold it over the cold months and bring it back. So it's a lot of work to do, but there's a lot of people that are excited about working with us. So we get new growers every day. I had a grower call me yesterday, a Ghanaian grower, who has very rare things that many people have asked me for, which is bitter leaf and
Mm.
water leaf, that are
Mhm.
two nutrient dense greens that didn't make the middle passage, but this guy's growing them in Clinton, Maryland, and he will be providing those seeds for our next catalog, hopefully, if
Mm.
everything goes well.
That is great to hear. Yeah, I think a lot of the greens, because the seeds are more fragile for lettuces and greens, they have a much shorter seed storage time than, say, peas and beans and squash seeds, which can last for years, if not
Yeah,
decades. I think that's why we had a lot of trouble maybe sourcing them or even getting them from generation to generation, because if they weren't planted out each year and harvested and resaved, then you pretty much lost them, because
that's right.
the regenerative, I think it's 10% maybe
Yes, a year.
that will come back from a seed after a year for some lettuce and green seeds.
That's right. And did you know that lettuce originated in North Africa? So it too is an
Mhm.
African crop.
Yep.
So we have developed multiple collections as a way to simplify education around these varieties, and hopefully they'll be coming out in the future. We have, of course, the Three Sisters, which most people know about, but I'm surprised at how they can't name even one variety of corn, squash, or beans. So
Mm.
it's knowledge that has been lost, but we're reclaiming it. We also want to give credit to indigenous American growers for chilies, all peppers come from Americas,
Mhm.
potatoes and tomatoes. Tomatoes were developed by the Aztecs. And so, if we were doing our due diligence every time we sat down to a delicious meal, I think we could probably thank the South American or American indigenous population for the
Mhm.
food on our plate, and also African and Asian growers, of which 80 to 90% of our food has its origins outside of Europe. So it's very exciting work, and it makes people happy, and it ends in a delicious meal. So we make
Mhm.
friends. We make a lot of friends, Kathy.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you feed people, they come back and they're super happy about that.
They
Um,
like it a lot.
oh, yeah. So one of the points you had was about the African or Southern pea, which I guess, we could start calling them African peas instead of Southern peas to really educate about their origin. And the enslaved peoples who were brought over from Africa along with those seeds or some of the things that they were growing were brought because of their skilled growing. Talents that they had. So they were chosen because they were skilled growers and would be able
Right.
to work on the plantations. And I think that point is kind of lost in history a lot. They just depict it like they were just grabbing random people, but they weren't. They were
They
going and trying
were.
to get the best of the farmers and the growers from Africa and bring them over to work on the plantations, which
Right.
is, a sad story, but that does tell you some of the mentality and why it was done.
Well, we're dealing with the redemption and the truth that it heals. So, an example would be the Ezel black eyed pea,
Hmm.
which came to Gullah Geechee land, and it was stewarded and managed by the Ezel family, and after slavery, everywhere they went, if they were sold, they carried the seed with them. And now that seed is available to us. And it's really so exciting to think that this family was able to do what very few families could do, which is hold on to a piece of their family history and heritage and provide this yummy, yummy thing for us. Another thing that you would probably be excited about is the Carolina Gold rice.
Hmm.
And so Carolina Gold rice, of course, rice was one of the what some people call trauma crops, along with tobacco and cotton,
Mm.
indigo, rice, these and sweet and sugarcane. These were major cash crops that built America, that built the entire world. I mean, if you look at most of the palaces in Europe, they were built on the back of sugarcane
Oh, yes.
workers.
Yep. And
But
tobacco. Yep.
that's right, and tobacco workers. But what we are doing is we're telling a happy story that our ancestors were brought here because of their talents. If you've been to Charleston, you see the ironworks, you see the Mindi, were iron workers from West Africa that were brought here specifically and did that work. And the rice economy built South Carolina, and we are growing Carolina gold rice, which is so important. And the story of rice is really amazing. There's a book called Black Rice that talks about the history and how many the scholars who traveled to Africa purposely um, uh, let's say, whitewashed the history of rice. They did not acknowledge that rice was indigenous to Africa as it was to Asia as well. What's interesting, this variety of rice is so flexible. It's so amazing. I call it. It's sort of like my ancestors. They could live in multiple environments, and they was do whatever they had to do. This rice can grow upland. It can grow in brackish water. It can grow in multiple climates. And the other thing about it is that it's low on the glycemic index, which means that I get to eat rice again. So very exciting product. It's very highly prized as a rice sold in gourmet shops, but it will be available for people to grow their African rices in their own backyards. I think that's kind of cool.
I think that's really cool, and I is, like, not something a lot of home gardeners have even attempted, so that will be a little bit of an education curve, right? But that will be so fun to try out.
It's doable. I have some
Mhm.
right on my deck right
Yep.
now that is sprouted.
Yeah, and I've seen some nice demonstrations even at the Smithsonian Folklife Festival of
Hmm.
some African rices growing, and so if it can grow on the National Mall, it can
It
grow.
can grow anywhere.
Yeah, it can grow anywhere. I wanna talk about you referred to 200 varieties of okra, and I just love growing okra. I think it's a beautiful plant. Even if you don't care for the taste of okra, I always tell people to grow it just for the looks.
Yeah, it's in the hibiscus family. It has such a beautiful flower, and it's very productive. Well, Kathy, I haven't met many people who don't like gumbo.
Mm,
So,
yep.
so, so I have a story about that. I was in Senegal, West Africa, and some friends had given me a dry okra product that you sprinkle and use it like a thickener in soup, and it makes such a good soup thickener. It was my last day in Dakar, and I'm going through all the stores trying to bring some of this powder back with me, and I could not remember the name in Wolof, which is the dominant language in Senegal. And so I'm trying to motion everybody, nobody's speaking English. And I'm like, it looks like a pod. And so I get back on my airplane. I sit next to my friend who invited us to come to Senegal. And I said, what is the name of okra? I couldn't for the life of me remember how to say it in Wolof. And he said, oh, it's gumbo. So with egg on my face.
Mhm.
So gumbo is something, and the use of it, is fantastic. Of course, those Louisiana people, no harm to you, Louisiana people, but we make an amazing gumbo in the Carolinas as well. And ours does not require a roux because okra can provide that for you. Okra, we're working with Chris Smith from Utopian Seeds, who is the American guru on okra. We are growing all kinds of okra that has beautiful leaves, that has amazing stories that come with it. There's the Catawba Freeman that was grown by Catawba Indians and their enslaved population. Probably know North Carolina Indians, tribes were had many slaves as a part of their communities. But I just got one in the mail just yesterday that I want to talk about. And it was sent to me by Mike Washburn from Seed Savers Exchange. And this one is something called the Angola prison okra.
Hmm.
So, have you ever heard of the Angola prison?
I have not. I'm interested to hear about this.
Well, you're seeing it in movies because there was a movie about these guys in the deep south and they went around and they were singing bluegrass. And
Mhm.
I forget the name of the movie. It was a really popular movie.
Oh, I it was with George Clooney, It's Coming to
Yes,
Me.
yes. So you see.
Oh brother, where
Oh,
art thou?
oh, I
Yeah.
love that because,
Oh,
I
yes.
come from the region of
So
North
they
Carolina.
escaped from that prison? Is that was
That's
part of the
right.
story? Yep,
That
there
was
it is.
Angola prison,
Ah.
okay? So, we, got our hands on I just they came to me yesterday in the mail, to grow out this variety of okra that was used to feed prisoners. Uh, so the way in which I got this seed was so interesting. What happened was when I was traveling in Pennsylvania, I learned about the tremendous success of Black caterers in the area between Philadelphia, Delaware, and Baltimore. And they had done a lot of breeding. They raised their own foods for their catering business. And many of them became very wealthy with restaurants. And one of the things that they grew was that was a part of this collection. It's called a Roughwood collection. And we have a few seeds. We'll have more from that collection that was actually collected by Horace Pippin, the artist, the famous artist. And so one of the ones we got was one called the Moyaminsing Spring Valley Jail tomato. And so I had to grow this tomato. It was bred by prisoners in these jails in Philadelphia. There are other things that come from that. And then a year or two later, somebody sent me another story. Yana Fishman from North Carolina sent me the Lottie Collard. That is another variety that was bred in prisons in Lumberton, North Carolina. And there's boy, what a story goes with that. Oh my God. We are uncovering that story. We're on the trail. We've actually located a prisoner who was involved in growing that because the prisoners have to grow their own food. We also understood that the warden or some other people were trading seeds. So we were on the hunt for that story. So as I was telling my friend Mike Washburn this story that we had located these two prison seeds, he says, "Well, I got one I think you'll be interested in." And I'm going like, "What is it?" So he says, "It is the Angolan prison okra." So he sent me those seeds that came yesterday. And so we are planting those out in honor of our ancestors and our family members that were captured and still to this day work in unpaid servitude to our country through the prison system and are still doing seed breeding work until this day in jails in America. Slavery ended on paper, but in actuality, many of our family members are languishing in prisons. But I must tell you that of all places to be in a prison, the place that they feel most safe and most happy is in the prison gardens.
Mhm. Yeah, those can be places of solace and healing, and you get a little bit of autonomy, just a tiny bit, right, over the
Yes, you
plants.
do.
Yeah, so that's always something that can bring you a little bit of comfort there. So let's talk about maybe a story from your family, a seed that has been saved through your generations, or maybe rediscovered that was grown in your family. Any personal story like that, Bonita?
Oh, I have the most precious story. So I mentioned earlier that my family was from Winsboro, South Carolina, and they
Hmm.
were farming after during and after Reconstruction, and it turned out they were pretty darn good at it. So I went to a funeral. One of my grandfather's sisters, his youngest sister, passed away, and about 60 of my mother's first cousins showed up. So, as a
Wow.
history teacher, I started interviewing these people, and they were telling me how much money they made doing this farming because they were able to send their children to college. And
Mm.
one of the most important things they grew was this watermelon. So it was like, you grew a watermelon, and at that point, I did not know detailed information about varietal, ascensions like, the work I'm doing now. So I heard about this watermelon, and so I interviewed several, maybe five or six cousins that talked about how they would sell this watermelon, and they also grew sweet potatoes, other things, but they were able to live well, buy property. I went through the property records in Fairfield County and found all of this property was purchased by my ancestors, and I was shocked that in that period post slavery, they're able to do what we can't do now. They bought all of this property, kept expanding their farms, making them larger and larger. So once I met some of these folks from Seed Savers Exchange, they offered to rematriate seeds back to our growers, lost seeds from families, who never thought they would ever see those varieties again when they moved north, or even Southern growers who lost contact. And so I started interviewing my elder relatives. I have a cousin in Chapel Hill that's 105 years old. I started with her. She's pretty darn amazing. And she told me that she didn't remember the variety because she was a small child when they moved up north. They call it up north, which was from South Carolina to North Carolina. They moved up north. But she directed me to another cousin who was still down on the family farm in Winsboro. So I interviewed him, and he was like 95, right? And he's saying, "You expect me to remember what varieties we grew?" So I did this activity, which I do with all my interviewees as we collect seed stories. And I asked him to go back into his memory about what the kitchen smelled like, what was being served for lunch and dinner, what was on the table, and then he began to develop, some connection. I think they call it sight of memory. And so he began to be able to visualize that. And so then I asked him, what was that watermelon called? He says, "Well, I think you've gone too far to ask me that question." So I said, "Well, stick with me." And I asked him, was it round? Was it large? Was it a ice box, which is a tiny little watermelon that will fit in the refrigerator? Or was it a picnic, which is a large watermelon that can feed multiple people? Was it yellow? Was it orange? Was it red? Did it have stripes? What was the skin like? And through this journey into his memory, it just jumped out at him. It was the Stone Mountain watermelon. So it was so exciting. And I shared this with all my cousins. And because of the work I'm doing now, all my city-fied cousins are now interested in this agricultural history, and five of them hopefully will be growing. One is gardening, doing that work, and I have gotten these Stone Mountain watermelon seeds, and I'm sending those to my cousins. I'm also sending starts for those that maybe don't feel as
Uh-huh.
confident with seeds. And so my family in 2023 will be growing a watermelon that has been successful in our family for 100 years.
Wow. And yeah, I think that's such a great idea about sending them the started seedlings. For those who aren't comfortable with seeds, even though I feel like, almost watermelon seeds are set it and forget it. You just have to keep them watered, right?
That's right. Well, they want
Yep.
a hot place. They wanna be in the
Hmm.
hottest place in your garden.
For sure.
So and they you can trellis them, so they can grow up on a fence, and they want or they can be near a wall, so the heat can bounce off of them, and then you don't need to leave every watermelon on the vine. You cull them down to maybe 2 or 3 that you let go to full production. But that's where we are now,
Hmm.
Kathy. We are back, all the way back at ground zero, at the place where our ancestors were thriving, and we're proud. of their ability to take care of their families. I would like us, so many family, every American family, to experience, not at that level, but at some pride, even if it's nothing but oregano. I've got a Cuban oregano that you can't hardly kill. It grows in the kitchen. It's so prolific. And we've given it, I started out with 2 plants. We've given it to probably 80 or 90 people, and 90% of them still have it, years later. There's a bunch of it in the orphans court in Charles County, Maryland, because I gave it to 2 or 3 people in that office. They've broken off pieces, and now it's on every desk when you walk into orphans court. You see this oregano. So we're reclaiming our heritage one bite at a time.
So true. And then pass along plants, sometimes called heirloom. Those are some of the best things in my garden. I know that
Mhm.
every time you look at it, or every time you might eat it or cut a flower from it, you think about that person who gave it to you. And I would think that the watermelon your family is growing, nothing is sweeter or better tasting than what you grow yourself, of course,
Of course.
but it's gonna be even sweeter knowing that family background.
Yeah, because it's a precious memory, and it's a way to salvage something good that came out of the enslaved experience, that the stories of triumph and victory and success and independence are, what will fuel us, especially in light of the current times where people are trying to erase our history. We can reclaim our food history and our food sovereignty. So
Mhm.
it's very exciting work, and people are running to do it. There's a very large movement in BIPOC communities, and we're doing it. Can I talk a little bit about our indigenous community work? Do you have a minute?
Sure. Yeah, let's talk about that, and then we also wanna talk about, capturing some of that history project you were talking about, and then we'll give some links for people to learn more. But let's talk about that indigenous work.
So, as I began this journey with the seed company, there's a company called uh, Freed Seeds Foundation, the Free Seed Foundation, a gentleman by the name of Bill Braun. And when we were talking about this region where we're at, which is they call it the uh, western shore of the Chesapeake, that there were foods that were commonly grown by the Piscataway and traded by the Piscataway Nation, Piscataway Khoi, Rappahannock, Tampahonic, and Nanticoke, Lenape tribes of this region, the Anacostia people as well. And so this gentleman says, well, Bonita, I have in my possession a very rare seed that belongs to the Piscataway people. And of course, I can't even believe this. This is so cool. He said, but there's only 35 of them. That's all we have. And I would like to rematriate these seeds back to the Piscataway people. And also, there was another local tribe near in this area called the Akakeek, and there are no more Akakeek people left. So we began this journey of talking about providing heirloom varieties back to the tribal communities who have lost so much. Of course, they've lost their land. Many of them have lost their lives. They've lost knowledge of their history, which was, done, by design through the Dawes Act and other ways in which they have it appeared that all was lost. So here we are now in a position to bring back those seeds and put them in the hands of the people whose ancestors ate them, traded them, and grew them. So it was a very exciting experience. The problem is that the Piscataway don't have any tribal lands. They are not in possession of any land for the tribe. Luckily, the Akakeek Foundation has agreed to provide sanctuary for the Piscataway people. And the other thing that was lost about that is the knowledge of growing. And so we're working with the newly appointed, just this month, the National Southern Maryland National Heritage Area. And growing out these cultural varieties is going to be a major part of the work we do. Uh, and so we have Nanticoke, which is a delicious squash that is so amazingly biodiverse. You just can't believe how the manifestations that come out of this tremendous gene pool. And we have the Lenape pulling corn that's currently being farmed by Piscataway people in Southern Maryland. And then we have other rare seeds that we found that will make its way back home as we open up and find places for the Piscataway. We also were able to find a summer squash for the Nanticoke people that are growing in native roots in Delaware. So they are now growing out this delicious sweet summer squash that was a Nanticoke variety. And with the Ramapo and the Lenape, other varieties have been matriated back to those tribal communities. So Ujamaa calls itself a Black Indigenous organization. And so the work of rematriation of seeds and plants back to communities is paramount and center stage for what we have to do.
Mhm.
And we are working with Bryn Mawr University on lost crops of the Chesapeake. So we're developing a multi-year process. We've applied for a grant. It doesn't matter. We're doing it if we get the grant or not. So we'll be researching and looking and developing places where people can come and learn. We call them food forests. And so
Mhm.
we've named our food forest after Dr. Wangari Maathai, who is the first African sub-Saharan African woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize, and as important as that, she was the first environmentalist to win the Nobel Peace Prize. She was responsible for developing the Green Belt Foundation, which plants trees all over the world. Over her short life, she was oversaw the planting of 40 million trees in Africa, and we have already started 3 Wangari Maathai food forests in public places, in public schools, at environmental learning centers, interpreting these, which means putting signage that teaches people. And we're helping people to understand that your lawn very well might be your salad. You're probably stepping on something. For instance, you're stepping on those dandelion, you know they make some really good wine. Okay, so we want to help people to rediscover the natural environment, and we believe if you see the forest as a place of safety, as a place where you can find medicinals, where you can find food, that's a cool place in the wintertime. As we teach people to look for these things, we hope to build a love and respect for the forest and the value of trees and the tremendous gift of fresh air that they are struggling to give us today in spite of our ill behavior. These trees are still putting out tons and tons of fresh carbon air every day.
Mhm.
So we have a lot to do. There's a lot of wonderful work, and we hope to extend our project up to the Bacasset and the Wampanoag Indians. We're working with Chief George, who is a descendant of King Philip, who received the pilgrims as they came into Plymouth Rock. So the goal is everybody, no matter where you're from. I got a Ukrainian seed. All our growers are growing Ukrainian seeds. We have Palestinian wheat. So the goal is you all have a story. You all have something that's important to you and your family. Ujamaa encourages you to know your stories and find your stories and respect your elders. Quiz them all and go deep and find out what is the food that made you, because we all agree you are what you eat, right?
Mm.
So
Yep, and such important and fascinating work, and how can people find out more or get in contact with you?
All right, so our work with farmers and reclaiming that heritage is can be found at Ujamaa Farms. That's UJAMAA Farms.com. You can learn more about our work. And if you're interested in supporting this really exciting, I must tell you, this work is actually quite fun as well. You can find out more about us and support us by looking and purchasing seeds from Ujamaa Seeds. That's UJAMAA Seeds.com. So as we expand our collection, we this year are now offering perennials. We have trees and shrubs, all kinds of culturally meaningful things. And we know for sure that there's something for everyone. Uh, Enjoying the movement. Let's plant trees. Let's respect our ancestors and the planet.
Thank you so much, Bonita. And I totally agree. Seeds are just fun. How about that?
Yeah.
They, it's fun to play with seeds, fun to sort seeds, fun to collect seeds, and for no other reason, all these other great reasons we gave, but just to have the fun of the hobby of collecting and growing your own seeds is wonderful too.
Yeah, and a lot of them taste good. And do you know what? Some of them make really beautiful jewelry. I'm
Hmm.
looking for somebody. If you know how to make jewelry, we have this Turkish seed that is so gorgeous. Uh, you know, um, we also have the art combi watermelon that some of you may know is the one that has like a handle. Do you know that watermelons were also bred in Africa? And this art combi watermelon is built with a little. I mean, it's like a crook neck, and
Yeah.
it's easy to carry. So I don't know if that will not be in a catalog until next season, but look forward. There's more wonderful stories and deliciousness that's coming our way.
Yarrow plant profile. Yarrow, Achillea mellifolium, is a perennial plant that is used in pollinator gardens, meadows, as a ground cover, and in herb gardens. It is native to North America, Asia, and Europe. It is hardy to USDA zones 3 to 9. The leaves are soft and have a fern-like appearance. The flowers are available in a range of colors, including white, yellow, pink, red, or peachy tones. It attracts bees and butterflies to your garden. Yarrow likes full sun, heat, and good drainage. Planted in average to poor soils. If given rich soils or fertilizers, it grows leggy and flops over. The plant is drought tolerant and deer resistant. It makes an excellent cut flower and also dries easily for preserving it. Deadhead the first flush of blooms when they start to fade to encourage a second round of blooms later in the summer. It is used as an healing herb for wounds, and it's been used for centuries to brew beer as well as tea. Yarrow is easy to propagate by digging and dividing a section and then replanting the clumps. It can also self-sow. Warning, this plant can be an aggressive spreader. Yarrow, you can grow that. What's new this week? Well, the lilies are blooming. Both the Asiatic lilies that are highly scented in the garden and the daylilies that are starting to bloom up a storm and hopefully will go on and on for me this summer. Over at the community garden plot, we've harvested the garlic for the season and it's curing for the next few weeks before we can use it for cooking and store the extra. And I'm still picking blackberries and lettuces. We've put in seeds for our cutting flower garden, and we're happy to see that one of the zucchini mounds has sprouted seedlings up, and we'll just play wait and see with the other zucchini mound and see if those ever appear. Some good news that we received over our short spring break. we received a GardenComm 2023 Laurel Media Award at the silver level for digital media podcast series overall. And we are now in competition to receive a gold award, which we will hear about whether that has happened later this summer. And I'll share that news if that happens. So very proud of our achievement, and for everybody who has assisted this podcast, thank you so much to all of our guests, our listeners, and supporters. In local gardening events, a couple upcoming events I wanted to pull your attention to include the Maryland Native Plant Society's monthly meeting taking place on June 27th at 7 p.m. That is a Tuesday evening over Zoom. You can register for that at mdflora.org. The topic is ecological gardening with climate change to prevent future invasions and assist native migrations. The speaker is Bethany Bradley. She's a professor of biogeography and invasion ecology in the Department of Environmental Conservation at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. And that is free and open to the public. The next event is a series of lectures called Introduction to Fern ID. And if you've ever tried to identify a fern in the woods, you'll know how difficult that is. So this is taking place from June 28th to July 26th on Wednesday evenings. The lectures are held online via Zoom. It's 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And it is also has supplemental workshops in person and field trips on Saturday, July 8th to National Arboretum in D.C., Saturday, July 22nd to Riverbend Park in Virginia. The fee is $260 to sign up for that series of courses. The instructor is Kit Sheffield, and this course is being hosted by Nature Forward. And you can find out more about that and register at natureforward.org. Look under the programs tab for that. Happy gardening!
Get low-maintenance alternatives to lawns with the new book Ground Cover Revolution by Kathy Jentz. Reducing the lawn is among the biggest trends in homeownership, with an endless stream of homeowners looking for an eco-friendly alternative to a traditional, everyday grass lawn. In the last 3 years alone, over 23 million American adults converted part of the lawn to a natural landscape, and now are looking to do even more. The biggest challenge to adopting this new ideal of the perfect lawn is knowing how and when to replace your turf and which plants are the best ones for the job. Ground Cover Revolution is here with all the answers you need. Included are 40 in-depth profiles of plants that are perfect choices for replacing a grass lawn. There are options for sun, for shade, for dry and wet sites, and for various climates around the globe. There are choices that bloom, options that are evergreen, and selections that are deer-resistant. Author Kathy Jentz has also included an incredibly useful chart that gives you all the details on each of the 40 choices for quick reference and to make your ground cover selection process even easier. Whether you want to replace the entire lawn or just reduce the amount of land dedicated to turf, Ground Cover Revolution will help you usher in a new and improved idea of what a beautiful lawn should be. Available at bookstores now and also at Quarto.com, where you can get 30% off using discount code GARDENING30. In the new book, The Urban Garden by Kathy Jentz and Terry Spate, you'll find dozens of inspiring and creative ways to grow flowers, shrubs, vegetables, herbs, and other plants in small spaces and with a limited budget. Whether you want to grow on a balcony, rooftop, front stoop, or a tiny urban patio, turn your growing dreams into reality and build a gorgeous and unique garden that showcases your personal style while still being functional and productive. With the ingenious ideas and resourceful tactics found here, you'll be maximizing yields and beauty from every square inch of your space while also making a lush outdoor living area you'll crave spending time in. Whether you're growing edible plants or beautiful flowers, the 101 amazing growing ideas found in the urban garden will turn your tiny urban yard into a treasure trove of green you'll be proud to share with family and friends. Buy your copy today at your local retail bookseller or order it online now at Amazon.com or bookshop.org.
This is the last word on cucamelons from Ellen Wells, and that's me. I'm Ellen. I'm also the editor of a fun new home and garden newsletter called Food and Flower. You can find that by heading over to foodandflower.substack.com. I am also editor of 2 horticulture industry trade newsletters you may have heard of. One is called Buzz, and the other is called Tropical Topics. But today's topic concerns a somewhat new to me edible called the cucamelon. I've grown it once, and that was a couple of years ago. And I'm telling you, I will be scouring all of my local garden centers trying to find and grow this thing. I loved it so much the first time. But first, what exactly is a cucamelon? It's a funny name, right? Well, you might also find it at the garden center called Mexican sour gherkin cucumber. It's a plant in the cucumber family whose fruits actually look like grape-sized watermelon. And it has a green-hued mottled skin. That's why it looks like a watermelon. These tiny fruits with a tangy, sour flavor are meant to be eaten fresh in salads or even pickled for use in, as a salad topping or a sandwich topping, or hey, why not in a fancy martini? But that is not why I would grow this cucamelon. Not at all. I quite dislike the flavor, actually. I would grow this plant, again, for its amazing vineability. I just love the way it grows. It vines like a champ. But without the thicker stems and thicker vines you'd see in a normal-sized cucumber. So it's not all, knees and elbows looking. The coverage of its foliage is just really quite dense, and it is just so attractive, the whole kit and caboodle, as they say. One plant will grow up and around anything, so give it plenty of space. It'll grow to be about 6 to 7 foot tall if you straightened it out. But why would you do that? Just let it grow. Let it ramble all over your garden fence. It'll deck itself out in hundreds of buttercup yellow, mini-sized flowers, the flowers that you would get in a cucumber plant, but smaller. And it'll result in hundreds of mini-sized mottled cucamelons of about 1 inch in length. Some other growing tips, I just have 3 of them for you. First one, give it full sun. Second one, give it plenty of water. And third, give it plenty of space to roam around. And a 4th tip, just from me, my point of view, give the fruits to the birds and just enjoy the vine for its ornamental value. So that's it. This was the last word on cucamelons from me, Ellen Wells, of the Food and Flower newsletter over on Substack. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to GardenDC. You can become a listener supporter for as little as 99 cents a month by going to anchor.fm/GardenDC/support. Another way to support this podcast is to subscribe to our monthly digital publication, Washington Gardener Magazine. To do so, go to WashingtonGardener.com. Thank you. You can find Washington Gardener online at WashingtonGardener.com, on Twitter at WDC Gardener, on Instagram at WDC Gardener, and on Facebook.com at Washington Gardener Magazine.